63 of At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. I'm Haber, below me is Martinez, and to my left is Phil Reizenstein, a very prominent local South Florida criminal defense attorney who we're very proud and happy to have on our show to share some of his experiences and interesting anecdotes with us today. I've captioned the show, The Evolution, the Character, and the Characteristics of the REG-MJB. That's the Richard E. Gerstein Metropolitan Justice Building, and that's the local Miami criminal courthouse that's been standing since before dinosaurs roamed the earth. There have been a lot of really interesting things that have happened in that building over the years, going back to Ted Bundy being tried in courtroom 4-1, court broom sweep, all sorts of interesting things and all sorts of characters that have come out of it, many of whom you've met right here on At Your Service with Haber and Martinez. That said, Phil is a veteran lawyer. As I said, he started his practice in 1986. Like Ed Martinez, he was hired with the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office as his initial starting point. Unlike Martinez, Phil was hired by Janet Reno, and he worked under Janet Reno for about 7 years. He started in the trenches as a pit prosecutor in county court, worked his way through the narcotics division, just as Ed did, and left as a division chief in felony court. He's been practicing privately since then, although he did take a stint working full-time as regional counsel, which is something that we'll talk about in a little bit. But as of now, he is a sole practitioner with associates. His wife was his former law partner and is now a sitting county court judge here in Dade County. That's Jackie Woodward. And we're like I said, we're just thrilled to have Phil come along. He tries all sorts of really interesting cases, federal, state. He travels the country. He's practiced all over the place, and we're very grateful for his taking the time to join us today. So thank you very much, Phil. Appreciate your coming on.
You know, listen, it's great to be here. I've got to immediately correct something because that's going to be a big problem in my house. When Jackie was in private practice and we worked together, she was my wife. So as everyone would know, I worked for her. She was my boss.
At home and at the office.
Exactly. And it's a true story. When I gave the introductory speech for her when she was made a judge, and I forget what are they, it's not a coronation, but investiture. The very last words I said, I turned to the judiciary in Miami-Dade County and talked about all of the pleasures I had in practicing with her. And I looked at them and I said, so now I'm going to leave you with some very famous, wise words. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last.
Here I thought you were going to take a different tact. My cousin David Haber, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, named his fishing boat the Yes Deer. So
there you go. Yeah, right. Justice Building, I think, was opened in 1962, the year I was born.
Wow. Really?
Yeah.
It was longer than that. I mean, based on the asbestos content level, I figured it'd been there for at least another 30, 40 years before that.
Right. No, before that, because, you know, I want to talk about history. You know, your introduction was so lawyerly. It was, let's just get to it. I want to talk about the history of the Justice Building and the weirdos and the crazy stuff.
If the audience wants to know what it's like to sit at a CLE seminar for us as lawyers, that's it right there.
Right. Yeah. So before the Justice Building, they did criminal court at the civil courthouse downtown. There was a jail there. There was a holding cell. And that's where the person who took a shot at Franklin Roosevelt in the 1940s, the attempted assassination was held and tried. And so our criminal courts were all in downtown until the Justice Building was opened as this modern miracle of the times. And it was so big and it was so luxurious that the early newspaper reports that other county agencies were taking up space in that building because, you know, the courts just couldn't use all the space they had, which is...
You mean when they originally opened the REG?
Yep. Yeah.
Right. When I started practicing, the state attorney's office was on the 6th floor of that. And I think the PD's office was on the 7th floor of that building.
Yep. Made it harder.
You know, now none of those guys have their own separate buildings.
Made it harder to hide from judges who were looking for you, right, Phil?
Oh, we had some security. You know, it was so important to me, my time in the state attorney's office. I remember the date. I walked into that building as a new hiree, August 11th, 1986. I remember the date. And that 6th floor had a fishbowl, and you met with the receptionist, and then you had a code and you went into the back. And I don't know if,
isn't it odd that most state, and I don't know if it's odd, but it's just, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, most former state attorneys remember the day they were hired and definitely remember the last day they worked there because it was such a good job.
it was the greatest job in the world, because if you wanted to feel like you were making a difference, and that's with all due respect to assistant public defenders who I'm sure feel the same way, but if you want to feel like you were making a difference, every day you went to court, you touched someone's life.
Every day. And you know why I became a state attorney? I did my CLIs, as just a quick anecdote. And I saw how frustrated defense attorneys, PDs, and privates were. Because remember, I went to college later. I went to college at 27. I became a state attorney at 36. So I'm walking around with life experience and a lot of more years than some of my younger colleagues who just got out of law school. This is their first job ever. And I would see how frustrated defense attorneys were when the lawyer, the prosecutor just couldn't see that this man was either A, innocent, God forbid, which was rare, but happened occasionally, or B, more importantly, you just can't prove this. You don't have the proof. Everybody thinks your client's guilty, and it's so frustrating. I saw how powerless you were, and you have to file motions, and you have to fight, and sometimes even go to trial. And I thought, I could just solve this. I'll become a state attorney, and I'll take it into my own hands and go, yeah, no, these cops did something wrong here, or no, there's just not enough evidence here, or maybe the guy's innocent. And I had control to do it, make a difference, whether we were prosecuting, which is what I've talked many times on this show, whether we were prosecuting people that definitely needed to be prosecuted or making sure that an innocent man wasn't prosecuted. We had the power to do that, and it felt great. Am I wrong?
It was a great responsibility. I was hired when I was 23. I started 11 days after I turned 24.
Wow.
And I did things quick. And I look back on it, I needed some perspective. But Janet Reno drummed into our heads that our first job was to make sure that, we didn't do a tragedy, and that we moved to dismiss cases against innocent people. Yep. And her second thing was always go where the evidence takes you without favor.
Correct.
That led to some interesting things. I prosecuted someone for a drug trafficking case. He was convicted. He had a second one. He wouldn't plead. I prosecuted him again. He was convicted again. I didn't seek any additional time. He was just being a jerk. And I got called into Janet's office because he filed a complaint with the ACLU on one of the cases, and she wanted to know about it. And I had a feeling what was going on. So when she asked me about it and I went through it, she said, well, do you have any concerns? And I said, well, I don't, Miss Reno. And the second conviction on the other case, when he was out on bond and dealt another kilo, really removed any concerns you might have. And she gave me a quizzical look, and she said, okay, that's good. And that was that. But she was the best boss you could ever have.
That's right.
In terms of ethics, in terms of doing the right thing. She had a sneaky sense of humor, but she was inspiring. Yeah. Unless she was angry, and then she was intimidating, because I'm 6'2" and she was taller than me.
Well, she produced an awful lot of incredible quality lawyers in that office, and that's really a testament to her, and her structure and her mentality and the way that she did things. I mean, even I had the pleasure of knowing her and interviewing with her, and when I was at CLI, spending some time with her, and she was just an incredibly impressive woman, incredibly impressive.
I'll get serious for 1 second. I think one of the things I'm disappointed with, and I'm friends with Kathy Rundle, and we chat every now and then, is they don't have an integrity convictions unit. They don't have a unit that reviews convictions to make sure everything went okay. That even would go back 10 and 20 years ago. I just know Janet would have jumped on that bandwagon and had one immediately. It was very important to her.
I agree. And I'll be honest, Kathy has always been good. Kathy Fernandez Rundle, the current state attorney, has always been really good to me. Like anybody else in any position, especially when you're in a position of power or you're in a position of leadership, you're going to have flaws. Nobody's 100% perfect. But I can tell you that what you were taught by Janet Reno was ingrained in people of my era when we went through the office when she wasn't there. But it came from my bosses. It came from David Paulus, may he rest in peace, who was trained under Janet Reno.
Right. They were all trained by Janet.
Came from Frank Leday, who was trained under Janet Reno. Came from Fred Kirsten, who was trained, I believe, under Janet Reno. So I had a phenomenal career through the state attorney's office, mainly because of my bosses were trained by Janet Reno. So, You know, narcotics was a great experience. Economic crimes was a great experience. And the experience that was wonderful about it was that we were being taught to be the gatekeepers of justice. And that's what felt good every morning going to work.
Absolutely. And the times that you did good, that's the word phrase that you did good, felt great.
Awesome.
And to me, the times that I won cases, for the most part, I didn't really celebrate too much because I always thought it was a waste of a human life. I always thought the person who got convicted chose a different path. And now they're going to be incarcerated, and that was sad.
I've said it many times on this show, right, Mike? What's one of my pet peeves? I don't understand, and nothing personal. I'm not judging. I don't understand the mindset of prosecutors celebrating when they win. There's nothing to celebrate.
Well, and also the mindset.
I'm sorry, Mike. Sorry, but you know what? I'm sure, Phil, you get it because you've been there. But remember, we're talking to citizens, civilians. We go in, and if you're doing it for the right reasons, as Phil was pointing out, you're doing it because you have to. You don't really want to go to trial. We don't really want to put these people in prison for longer than we feel they should, but they don't want to accept the plea. So now we got to go to trial. But even the defendant's parents, kids, sisters, friends, co-workers, all people had nothing to do with the crime that the defendant committed, suffer. So what the hell are you really celebrating?
Well, even worse than that, and we've talked about this many times also, is the pervasive mentality of being a prosecutorial robot, as opposed to a sentient being that thinks and uses their head and exercises some judgment and discretion. It's just prosecute. I mean, you know, we file motions, C4, stand your ground. It's like the default from the state attorney's office is let the jury figure it out. We're not conceding anything.
That was Broward's motto forever.
Right. Well, and to a large degree, it still is. But I find it more and more because I do a lot of, I do a lot of domestic violence and DUI. And when you're doing a lot of county court cases here in Dade, that's what you come up against. You come up against a mentality of we're just here to farm these cases through the system. And they don't want to hear it. They don't want to invest the time to discuss it. They don't want to listen to reason. You can draft up a motion with your facts, with your law. I don't even know that they bother reading it. They just spit out a canned objection.
Well, Judge Moreno, when he was in the state court, sometimes would say, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. And that would be when the state attorneys would say, well, I don't know, I have to go speak to a supervisor. You know, Janet instilled in me the fact that I was in a courtroom, sometimes by myself, 5:30 in an afternoon, a trial was unfolding and I needed to make decisions. And she instilled in me, that's what I pay you for. You need to be prepared. You need to make your best decision. And if you make your decision on the facts and you end up being wrong, I'll back you up. What she didn't ever want to hear was say, well, I had 60 cases set for trial that week and I was overwhelmed and I wasn't prepared for this. That would get steam to come out of her ears. But if you said to her, listen, I was in trial, this was the testimony, I didn't think it was going well, so I made a reasoned decision, I reduced the charges, I settled the case. Okay, I get it, people are upset, but that was my best call at that moment. She was in your corner 100%.
That's exactly the speech David Paulus gave me when he took me to lunch when he chose me for the narcotics unit.
Right.
One of the things he told me was, I expect you to make a decision, right or wrong. I'm not going to get upset if you make a decision that's based on ethics and on your best ability. You're really doing it to the best of your ability. And if it's ethical, I'm not going to have a problem. But you have to make a decision because you're in narcotics now.
Right.
You get calls from 11 o'clock at night on the side of the road or serving a warrant or busting into somebody's house, or they're trying to get into somebody's house and they're trying to get a warrant and they're asking you if this qualifies as exigent circumstances to break down somebody's door or smash a window. And you got to make that call, right or wrong. You got to make that call. And now I see where you got it from. Got it from Janet.
Mike, I don't know how you find it, but I find today the layers of bureaucracy are layer upon layer. So, when I have a motion, it's got to go to a supervisor, has to go to a supervisor, has to go to a supervisor. And the other troubling thing, and this just happened, and I won't say names, is I filed a motion to dismiss. I file them very rarely. It was in a car theft case, which I don't do a lot of anymore, but it was clear. And the prosecutor responded with, well, if you file this motion and I have to respond to it. Right. So my response was, I get very upset when that happens, and I immediately push back in open court. And I said, well, let's just game this out, Judge. Let's just be clear. So when he says no plea, let's say I lose the motion to dismissed, but the prosecutor thinks that, in his opinion, based on the fact my client has no priors, that ethically it would be the right thing to do to perhaps settle it with probation and restitution. But no, since I've challenged them, now we have to go to trial. Now they're going to seek 5 years. Really? They are attacking my client and they're going to punish him for exercising his constitutional rights? I find that outrageous. And I have a speech along those lines for every one of those times. When I want a bond hearing, when I want an Arthur hearing, when I file a motion, it's no plea. And let me just finish real quick. I say to them, listen, I get it. 14-year-old, 12-year-old child, victim of a case, bad issue. I take their deposition, you're going to revoke pleas. I get that. I save that to the end of the case. But that's where I draw the line, and that's a reasonable line. Yeah.
And, but we've seen that not just with prosecutors. We see that with a lot of judges, in the form of what they call the trial tax, right?
Yeah.
Where, you got plea offers on the table. Your client didn't take it. He rejected a plea, went to trial. The judge colloquied him over the plea, and then comes time for sentencing and the judge body slams him. Some, there's a handful now that do. There were more back in the day. I'm sure you want to talk a little bit about some of those judges, maximum morphonius types. But you see that a lot with judges too. It's not as pervasive as it is with younger prosecutors, but it definitely occurs.
And if I could just jump in briefly, again, I usually am not the voice of seriousness on this show, but it comes from, I think, that these kids are young and they're not.
Are you talking about judges or prosecutors?
Prosecutors.
Well,
I would.
the judges too.
That's my point.
Quite a few of them.
Young as well, but we get prosecutors are young. The training is not there, and I'm not talking about case law because they'll bombard you with case law. They'll bombard you with binders of notes, but the training that's not there is the human part of it. The part of, for example, I used to say that when I was in narcotics. Similar. It was similar. What was the argument? We are either negotiating or we're litigating. If you're going to file a motion, that's fine. But the offer I'm giving you now on the table is off. Could get better. I don't know. You might take a depo and completely destroy my case where the case looks like it's going to be harder to win a trial than I thought, and the offer is going to get better. However, you file your motion or you take depos, things might get better for the state. We might actually have a little look into the little window into your client's mindset and his psyche and his background and realize maybe this guy is not a guy that should be on probation because he's not really looking to rehabilitate. He's just looking to get away with something and go right back out on the street and do something. So we don't know what's going to happen because you're choosing to litigate, and that's the road we're going to take. But they don't understand the difference. They think motion depots, take it to trial, or the min man. And that's not really the way it works. That's not how it should work. They're not trained that way. So
let's talk a little more about the building itself and the idea, the concepts. I know you want to do a little more history, a little more background. I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think there was some seismic changes in criminal law that occurred in that building that some of the historians will tell you about. And the first one would have been Gideon versus Wainwright and the establishment of a public defender's office. And all of a sudden now, the indigent of Miami had attorneys that were representing them before my time. Okay.
Wow. Not too much. You just said that they built the building the day you were born. So
yeah. But then when you had Phil Hubbard run for public defender and win and become the public defender before Bennett Brommer, then you had the introduction of young, idealistic, and super smart and good lawyers like H.T. Smith and Roy Black and Jack De Niro, who tell the stories their own way. They were all together there, going around and saying, "No, we're not going to plead. We're gonna enforce the Sixth Amendment. We're going to go to trial." And first, these judges, and let's talk about that for a second. I made sort of a snide remark about the young judges now, and it is a little unsettling. And they're dedicated and they work hard, but it's a little weird. Well, back then they were all old white guys. Let's face it, they were all old white guys. Most of them were grumpy. They weren't really that good. There were some exceptions, but for the most part, this was a cake job where they got a salary. They couldn't make it in private practice. And the last thing they wanted to do was try a case. They had other things to do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They had tennis, they had golf, they had bars that they wanted to hit. And when these public defenders, this group pushed back, Norm Gerstein was part of that group before he was a judge. At first, the judges tried to retaliate against them. And then the public defenders began to swamp them with
Speedy demands.
speedy demands. And they blazed a path for the rest of us, which is we're not rolling over, we're defending our clients, and we're going to fight. And so going back to what we were talking about, when I have a prosecutor push back, or even a judge push back on what could happen when I go to trial, where they're going to revoke a plea offer, I feel like I have to defend what those people did for me back in the 1970s and for us by drawing the line. And, again, I tend to have my own way of doing it, but I'll pretend to be puzzled, and I'm like, I don't understand, Judge. You don't know enough about this case. It's been around for a year. They're offering 4 years of probation, and somehow, if we go to trial, you're going to learn so much more that you think you could put my client in jail for 10 years. I don't understand it. And I used to carry around with me Wilson versus State, which is a Florida Supreme Court case that talks about the fact you can't punish someone. I do this in DUI all the time because, Michael, that's where they do it. Minimums today, but 60 days in jail if you lose a trial. And I pull out Wilson, I start reading from it, and I'm going to go, I know we all agree that this is what the Florida Supreme Court says, so I'm lost. Please educate me. How is it we've just gone from probation or minimums to prison? I don't understand.
Right.
And they get it. They understand that I'm pushing back.
I had 2 judges on a case, which there's a reason why it took so long. That they switched judges out. That I ended up, and both of them, one of them was not so young, but had never done criminal. He came from civil. The other one was fairly young, and both of them looked at me with inquisitive looks. The first one on the second sounding why I hadn't completed depots. It was just a grand theft. It was just a grand theft case, Phil. I looked at him and said, Judge, it's a police officer sting. It's a public corruption case. I had 30 cops alone, just 30 cops, not including the officer who was used as a CI/UC. He didn't get it. And then the other one said the same thing. It's a grand theft. They're offering you an adjudication and 1 year state jail. Why aren't you taking it? I was like, Judge, you don't even know the facts of the case. It's 3 years old. It's a public corruption. They don't get it because they haven't done this long enough. No judgment on their abilities. One of them has become a great judge. The other one, I don't know because I haven't seen her in a while. But one of them has become a really good judge in criminal. But they just don't have the experience. And that's why, when Phil says it's unsettling for the people who don't know the law, it's unsettling to us because we need the judge to be the referee. That would be like a rookie in the NBA after his rookie year saying, I'm out and I'm going to ref. Whoa, hold on, bro. I don't know if you're ready to ref the games yet.
Phil, I don't know if you are old enough to know this or not, because you're only a couple years older than me, but I have a recollection. You had made a comment and a true comment about how back in the day they were all older white guys that were judges.
Right. Yeah.
But there was a judge here in Dade County, and I can't for the life of me remember his name. I kind of vaguely remember his campaign slogan, but he was Chinese.
Dominic Koo.
Dominic Koo, exactly. And do you remember what his slogan was? It was something like, why not a Chinaman? Or
it's not politically correct. I'm warning everybody. This is his slogan, not mine. Give a Chinaman a chance.
Give a Chinaman a chance, right?
Okay.
They weren't all old white guys.
Did he win?
Yes, he was a judge.
Okay. Famous true story, and you need to get Ted Mastos on here because Ted really has an institutional knowledge. Okay. Ted is no, how does it go? Okay, so Ted, I think, saw this. Dominic Koo is a county court judge in Miami Beach, and he is driving, and he gets a ticket. And the cop sees some sort of identification, like maybe the edge of the badge or something, and says, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm a judge in county court. And the cop says to him, there are no Chinamen, or I think he used a slur, an Asian slur,
right.
Begins with a C. There's no chinks on the bench in Miami, and gives him a ticket. And don't you know, he had a case in front of him like 2 days later.
Yeah.
And Judge Koo came on the bench, saw him, and repeated the slur and said, officer, now you know there are Chinamen, or even though worse slur, on the bench.
Ted's another great example of one of those personalities that has defined the REG-MJB. You don't have an REG-MJB without Ted Mastos.
Ted Mastos, of course, Cy Gare, Richard Sharpstein, hundreds of others that have just come and gone that I get upset that I don't recall and I don't remember. And I think some of the reason that I recall them is because when I showed up as a wide-eyed 23-year-old, you know, these people were doing stuff. They had cases, they had clients, they were in courtrooms, they were arguing things, and I was wide-eyed. And as I got older, I realized a lot of them weren't any good. But at the time, I was just like, wow, this is something.
So
And I was so impressed. I was blown away by it.
I don't want to gloss over what you've said twice.
Yeah.
So you graduated from law school at 23.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
That is. So how old were you when you graduated from high school?
16. In college at 20. Yeah, I moved quick. I had a strange upbringing, but that's a different show.
You're always for the people who don't know you, for the audience that doesn't know you, the non-lawyers.
Yeah.
Phil Reis, you are one of the known and respected for your intellect, aside from others things, but you are known and respected for your intellect and your knowledge of the law in that building tremendously. To the point
Well,
where
I appreciate that.
What would Phil do? How would Phil attack this? How is he going to think about this?
But you know, now that I'm 60, and I am, I look back at some of the judges who treated me badly, and some of the older prosecutors or older defense attorneys that treated me badly, and I think I have an understanding of it. And I think the understanding of it was I was this 23-year-old. I didn't have a know-it-all attitude, but I was eager,
Right.
and I wanted to work, and I would file motions, and I would do what had to be done. And I think some of these older judges just sort of resented my youth.
Right.
And sort of resented my energy and and so forth. And sometimes when young prosecutors or young judges get me upset, I stop myself and I say, what's going on here? Am I just a little angry that they're 35 years old and telling me what the law is? And so I kind of see it a little bit from them. You know, one judge who had a difficult ending to his career was Alfonso Seppi, and he wanted to be my mentor. Of course, he was taking bribes. I wasn't involved in that.
I heard taking bribes was actually the least of the unethical things he was doing.
Well, he did sleep with a defendant's wife and lose and got kicked off the bench, but then he got reappointed. That would never happen today. That would never happen today in a Me Too society, and probably shouldn't have been reappointed, because after that's when he started taking bribes. But here's my story about him: is when I was in his division, you know, I would want to do something, and he would say, file a motion. And I'd say, okay. I'd go back to the office and I'd file the motion, and I'd come to court and the clerk had the motion, and I'd have a copy, and I'd be very proud. 2 days later, Judge, I filed a motion, and I'd hand it to him. And he'd pick the motion up, he'd look at it, he'd toss it in the garbage. He goes, okay, tell me what the case is about. And he was just harassing me. Just harassing me. But in a true story, this is how they trained state attorneys in 1986. They gave me a folder, and inside the folder were pieces of paper. And the pieces of paper told you how to do things. So, for example, there was a piece of paper on probation violation hearings. And I do my first felony probation violation hearing in front of Judge Seppi, and I read the piece of paper, and I introduce myself, and I say what it says. And then I say, Judge, will you please swear the defendant in and ask him if he's the person placed on probation and the case number? PD says objection. Judge says state. And I go, I don't know. It's what it says right here on the piece of paper. It's what they told me to do. What do you mean? What am I supposed to respond to the objection? It says right here, swear him in. Seppi goes, that's it? I said, it's right here on the piece of paper. This is what they told me to do. Case dismissed.
I got to tell you, Phil,
Yeah.
it's not much better. I don't know.
Well, here's the postscript.
State attorneys, but
Here's the postscript. The defendant had more, and Seppi set the others for the next day. I went back and did research, and I found a case that said that was appropriate. And Seppi was the freaking prosecutor on the case. So now I come back the next day and I cite the case, and I'm a little bit angry. And I say, and by the way, Judge, I'm sure you remember Judge so-and-so, and you were the prosecutor on the case. And he looks at me, and, you know, I'm giving him credit where credit's due. And he goes, now you're thinking like a lawyer. That's the way they trained people back then. And there was a method to his madness, and I appreciated being trained by him in that way. He didn't hurt me. He didn't hurt justice. He didn't hurt the state of Florida. He was taking some time to give me a hard time to see how I would react.
Thank God you came on, because these are my pet peeves. I had a judge on a motion to suppress, right? With a prosecutor, with the day of the hearing, I'm not going to tell you the judge is. She's a wonderful human being. I love her dearly. She was an appellate lawyer, I think, for the PDs for years. On the day of the hearing, the prosecutor comes in and the judge says, are you ready for your hearing? Are you ready to call your first witness? She says, no, I'm going to rest on my responses. Now, for those, again, who are not lawyers, when there's an evidentiary hearing that's necessary, like a motion to dismiss or to suppress evidence, that's an evidentiary. The state has to They have to present some evidence, something, or the motion is granted and whatever you were asking for is granted, either dismiss the case or suppress the evidence. Phil, she stops in the middle of what she's doing. She says, "State, you can't do that." And she starts educating the state.
Teaching them.
My pet peeve. When I came through, which was after you did, if I had done that, the judge would have said, "State, you sure? Sure. No, that nothing. Okay. Defense, you have a motion. Do you want to do? Do you want to ask me something? Yeah, judge, and I move for you to dismiss. Granted." And then you call the state attorney into your chambers, right? So they call us in the chambers and they say, "Mr. Martinez, do you know why I had to grant that motion?" "No, judge, I don't. Because you got to do this, this, and this, and this." You don't do it from the bench helping them. And this girl still didn't get it. Why? Because there was nobody back at the office to give her anything other than, what did they give you, Phil? A piece of paper.
Yeah.
A piece of paper. She went to somebody and somebody handed her the same document she was handed.
They get a lot of training now. I've walked into their training classes. Michael, did you have judges that mentored you?
Yes and no. I mean, it was a little bit different. I started in 91, so I was a few years behind you.
Fine.
And I the first judge that I really developed a bond with was Tom Peterson over in juvenile.
Doesn't get much better than that.
And he was, but it wasn't so much me. I think that's just who he was for everybody.
That's true.
Guy.
Yeah.
And then Harvey Baxter up at North Dade, who I was just telling a story. I bumped into Fred Seraphin today, and I was just telling him a Harvey Baxter story, which I guess I could repeat now. Harvey was in the North Dade Justice Center, and he was in that 2-1 courtroom. And virtually every courtroom in Dade County has a sign that hangs in it that says something along the lines of, "We who labor here seek only truth or justice," or something. Well, he had a sign on the wall of his courtroom that said, "This is not Burger King. You cannot have it your way."
Well, just to throw this in, because we're talking about judicial campaigns and mottos. Harvey Baxter ran for county court judge and defeated Ted Mastos, and his slogan was "Put a mensch on the bench."
That's great. Harvey was a piece of work. He was a character, but I think in a way, he was also, he had pet peeves. One of his big things that he really would take the state attorney to task on was he hated the fact that that they dismissed DWLS cases for compliance. It drove him absolutely batty.
Right.
But, other judges did some strange things too. Like I remember being in front of Shelley Schwartz, Olive HaShalom. When Shelley got on the bench, he developed a pretty serious case of robitis. And he would start his calendars in traffic court by keeping the citizens, the public, the defendants, out of the courtroom. He'd have all of the cops in the courtroom first and go through with them the statutes that they should be charging and advising them of the amendments they need to make to avoid.
Oh, I wouldn't have allowed that.
Oh, he did it all the time. It was like an early morning before court. It was really annoying and frustrating, but that was one of the types of things that was, judges do that you can't stop them, but it ain't right.
I was lucky that I had judges who appreciated the fact that I was willing to work hard and that I was eager, and that I also think that I was reasonable, that I wasn't seeking the max on every case. And so Fred Moreno became a mentor to me and gave me a really hard time, and still does give me a really hard time in trial and in sentencings, but fair, and pushed me to see if I'd push back, and taught me, and I learned. And would one of the things we'd always say at sidebar is, and I'm going to do my Fred Moreno impression, he would say, "You'll lose bigger cases than this," because we were together in misdemeanor court, and then we were together in drug trafficking, when I was doing narcotics. But his point when he would say that to me was, have some perspective. Right. This isn't the biggest case in the world.
Right.
And so it was a real important lesson that I felt glad to have learned. And there were some judges who were abusive, and I don't need to talk about them just because they could be.
Right.
And then there's Arthur Snyder. Talk about your characters from that time period. I had a case where I picked a jury in front of Peter Capuan, and Snyder was going to try it. I'd never been in front of Snyder before. My police officer got in a plane crash. He was a private pilot, and he crashed his plane. He broke his back. So I'd asked for a continuance. And Capuan said, "Well, go talk to Snyder." So I walked into Snyder's courtroom, and Snyder looked up, and "Are you Reizenstein?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "Are you ready?" And I was like, "No, sir, my officer's in a plane crash." He goes, "Take him in." I'm like, "What?" "Take him in. You're in front of Snyder now." And he had corrections cuff me, and they sat me in the box. And the PDs, your colleagues, because this was around your time, are saying, like, "Can you get out of the way? I'm talking to a client." I'm like, "Well, I need a lawyer. I'm in custody. Look, I got cuffs on."
Why did he wait? You lost me on that one.
Yeah.
He took you
Yeah.
as the state attorney into custody.
Yeah,
For
because I asked for a continuance because I picked a jury and I wasn't ready because my officer was in a plane crash.
Oh, because you didn't
So,
know, you didn't,
yeah.
you didn't find out he was in a plane crash before you picked the jury.
No, right after that night, he crashed. He was out flying while I was picking a jury, and he crashed his plane. So Janet Reno's chief assistant comes down and sees me in custody, and he goes, "I'll be right back." This was before cell phones. He comes back with a Polaroid camera. He has corrections pick up my arms. So I'm in cuffs. He takes a picture and he walks away laughing.
Were you, Phil, you didn't happen to by chance attend the seminar a couple of weeks ago that Bob Scolo was the
No,
presenter?
I wanted to do that and I missed it.
So
He was
Moreno
there.
made me think of that. It was really, really interesting to hear him. It's one of the things he talked about was how life was as a circuit court judge here in Dade County versus what it is today, sitting on the federal bench. And, how it's shifted over this 40-year period. And it was really fascinating to listen to him tell that.
You know what I liked about him when he was a circuit court judge? He tried to think outside the box. If you remember, he ran his calendars different than every other judge. He did everything that was non-emergency on a Friday. So he'd kick all of his arraignments to Friday. It's stuff where people could get out of custody he would do. And he made his morning calendars 5 or 7 cases. And then he'd start his trials by 9:30. And then he'd spend Friday cleaning up the mess. And I just liked it because he was being innovative.
The thing I remember most about him from my own personal experience was that the first downward departure motion I ever did was in front of him on a guy who scored big. And Scola, let me tell you, he listened, he paid attention, he asked relevant, meaningful questions, and then he departed significantly from the guidelines. And that was huge back then, I mean, especially as a young lawyer to achieve that kind of a victory.
Let me throw something out there. True or false? I think ex-prosecutors make the best judges. And Scola's an ex-prosecutor.
I agree. I've said it.
I don't know.
On this show before. Again, no disrespect to the public defenders or the criminal defense lawyers, but as a prosecutor, you get to see you're in the belly of the beast.
You know what's going on.
Right. You know
what those cops who are the good ones or the bad ones.
You can read it, Phil. How many times now? I mean, you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
Right? The minute you leave the state attorney's office and you're a defense attorney, you start reading that A form and you can tell, oh, that's a lie. Oh, that's bullshit. Right. That never happens that way. Look, I'll give you an example. I called the prosecutor just yesterday on a case. She says, I'm a little concerned too. God bless her. She's one of those that thinks for herself. She says, I'm a little concerned about the case too. I don't see how the business owner is anywhere on this 3 undercover buy of crystal meth in a store from an employee. And then all of a sudden, when they go serve the warrant to pick the guy up and to serve the warrant in the store, all of a sudden he gets arrested. I said, yeah, that makes no sense, right? She goes, yeah. And I said, and I don't know if they got a warrant to search the safe in the back room, which is where I'm getting at. And she says, well, I was wondering about that because it looks like they got consent. I said, no, remember, look, initially they say they asked for consent and my client denies them consent. She says, yeah, but later in the offense incident report, which for you guys who don't know is a more elaborate version of the arrest affidavit, they say they said they got consent to go in. I said, no, they didn't. She says, what do you mean? I said, read it again. You know what they wrote, Phil? A lot of different other things. And then they put, and we gained access to the safe. I said, notice what they wrote. They gained access. They didn't say they gained consent. So that immediately, after all the thousands we've read, right? You're like, oh, they're so full of crap. They just threw it in there to see if the prosecutors and the judges that don't have the experience don't catch it. That's why they do that.
Well, let me just follow up on one thing. And the reason why I think prosecutors tend to make the best judges, ex-prosecutors, is because public defenders, I think, and criminal defense attorneys feel that they're taking the bench sort of with people looking at them in a jaundiced eye, like, oh, they're going to be really liberal. Maybe. I think it's harder for a new judge who's a former PD to grant a motion to suppress than it is for a former prosecutor.
I don't disagree with that.
That's what I'm talking about. Of course, then it's
But I do need to
where they
say
go from there.
two things. One,
Yeah.
we have some fabulous ex-PD judges.
Now,
That's no question about that. And two, speaking of the Scolas, obviously we all appeared in front of Jack. Well, at least you and I did. I don't know about Ed, but you and I appeared in front of Jackie many times, when she was in state court too. And one thing about her is
Bob Scola's wife, Jackie Scola.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
One thing, the other Jackie, Jackie.
Yes. She's retired.
The thing about Jackie Scola that I really loved as a judge, she was tough as nails. I mean,
she was tough.
She's
kind of outside my realm of great. She was a tough judge.
It begs the question of how that household worked, but whatever, that's a story. But my point was, the one thing that Jackie Scola was really, really consistent about and always really impressed me with was, if a state attorney was unprepared in that courtroom, if a state attorney did not tender discovery, if a state attorney was even perceived as playing a game, my God, did she come down on them like hellfire and brimstone.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's good. She knew what they needed to do. She
Correct.
was trained by Janet Reno. She was not going to tolerate games playing. When I said that, when I started talking about Judge Jackie Scola, I remember her as being very polite to the lawyers, would listen intently, and understood some of the problems, because she knew what it was like to carry a caseload and try cases and be difficult. But you're right. She didn't tolerate any nonsense.
No.
But from the state in particular.
Yeah. That's
And
what I
so,
meant.
like you said, it's kind of tough for an XPD to grant a motion because it's always in the back of their
At least a new one. Yeah.
Right. They think people are going to start talking behind them. Oh, of
Right.
course that's what the judge is going to do. But this was the exact opposite, where you knew if you were a prosecutor in that courtroom, you better have your A game every minute of every hour that you were sitting in front of that judge.
When I was in narcotics, there was a narcotics prosecutor that she refused to let back in her courtroom. For that very reason.
Let's circle back to a famous name from Justice Building history, Ellen Morphonius. Good and the bad. So yeah, she had this nickname Maxima Morphonius, and I think that is a problem that caused problems for generations afterwards. And I'll get to that in a second. But the good part about her as a judge was that was the Wild West. So when you went into trial, you had something you wanted to introduce, you knew it was coming in. She gave you your defense case. She let you make your case as a defense attorney.
Right.
But of course, bad things happen if you didn't make that case for it. And she was a good person, and I know that because I had some personal experiences with her. I tried a case, and after I gave closing, my grandmother got a heart attack, and I had to fly out of town, and she let me go. And when I walked into the hospital room the second day, the phone was ringing, and it was Judge Morphonius, and she didn't want to talk to me. She wanted to talk to my grandmother. She tracked us down.
That's awesome.
She had a good heart, but she had this nickname Maxima Morphonius, and here's where I think the problem arises when we talk about new judges now. I think new judges feel that they're going to get a reputation, that they're going to be lenient. And if they go to trial and someone loses, they want to be known as maximum something. If their name doesn't end in M, then they're kind of screwed. But they want to have this reputation of being a tough judge. And because somehow they feel that's going to help them out down the line. And I've seen that over and over again. Michael, back in your day when you were a public defender, how many judges tried to work you till midnight?
Well, I was never a public defender, just so you know.
I'm sorry. I thought you okay. Then as just a young lawyer, how many judges tried to work you at midnight?
I'm one
at a trial.
I'm one of those few lawyers who came out of law school, albeit not at age 23. I came out at 24.
Right.
But I'm one of those few lawyers who came out and hung his own shingle on day one and started practicing criminal.
Well, that's a tough road to hoe. But going back to that, how many judges tried to work you till midnight?
Well, I'll tell you, I do have, I think, still the record of the latest jury verdict in the REG-MJB. Mark Morris and I tried a case against Tammy Forrest.
Rest in peace. She passed away recently.
Oh, I didn't know
Really?
that.
A couple years ago, yeah.
Yeah, Tammy was okay.
She knew what she was doing.
We tried a case with her in front of Peter Lopez, where we closed on a Friday afternoon, and the jury said to the judge, we want to stay. We don't want to go home. And the judge basically said, all right, we'll stay as late as we want. We got a verdict at 1:45 a.m. on a Friday night.
Yeah. So I think back in the day again in the 80s and 90s, these judges would brag to each other. They'd come in and they'd say, I was in the building till midnight picking a jury. I work these, and then I started up again at 8 o'clock in the morning. And that just doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do the lawyers any good. It doesn't do the jurors any good. It doesn't do witnesses who are called to testify at 10 o'clock at night. You got a defendant whose life may be on the line. It's all bad.
Doesn't do the justice system any good.
Well,
But they wanted a reputation of being hardworking.
I will say this in that particular case with Lopez, he deferred to the jury. He did not keep.
Yeah.
The
No,
jury,
that's a different story.
Insisted on staying, and the judge accommodated them. And
Yeah.
he asked us too. I mean, he flat out said to us, "Look, if you guys aren't good with this, we're gonna." But
That's different.
Nobody wanted to piss off the jury. Everybody wanted the jury to be happy. That was the end game there.
But judges wanted reputations. They wanted to be known as tough on crime. They wanted to be known as hard workers. They wanted to be known as someone who would stay till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and if you lost a trial, get maximum. And I used to kind of think to myself, why don't they want to be known as fair and decent and a good person? They didn't want that.
Fortunately, I think that we have a lot of judges who are conscious of that and do really,
now. Well, a lot of their colleagues got spanked by the appellate courts.
I think that's the point. Today is than back then.
I wanted to tell a quick anecdote about Mastos, which just popped into my mind when you mentioned it. I was behind him in line a couple of years ago, waiting to get called in the cattle call pre-Zoom world when we actually had to go to court every morning. And Matt, you know how it is when you're standing in line. It's like being at the deli counter at Publix, except it's a straight line instead of people all over the place. And usually the person behind you or the person in front of you is, talking, and the bailiff's always telling you to shut up and this and that. It's just, it's fraternal, let's call it. So anyhow, Mastos is in front of me, and he finally gets up to the podium, and he calls his case and whatever, and the judge says this, and the prosecutor says that, and Mastos looks over at his client, looks back at the judge. He's doing the back and forth, and he says, Judge, I just have to tell you, back when I was a judge, Mr. Whoever, my client here, he actually appeared in front of me as a defendant. And now here I am representing him all these years later. And I just want you to know that when he came in front of me as a defendant, he was 6'2". Look what the system has done. It's beaten him down to 5'7".
Ted always liked Cy Gare's humor. So, and Cy, for those people watching who don't know, was a legendary criminal lawyer for 60s some odd years. Tried a case a week for 50 years of his life. Didn't take a lot of discovery. Right, didn't take a lot of discovery. And Cy had pattern responses that would keep him amused because he'd get bored, but people in the courtroom would love it. So everybody he represented was this poor child. Cy could have been 50 representing an 80-year-old man, and he'd have his arm around him saying, this poor child comes before this court, and things of that nature. My favorite Cy Gare patterned response was when he'd come to court because his client was out on bond, got arrested, posted bond again, and got arrested a third time, and now they were revoking his bond. And Cy would look at the judge straight in the face and say, Judge, if that's not a clear pattern of police harassment, I don't know what is. And he said it with a straight face, and people in the courtroom loved it, and people hired him because of it.
And he had the other one where he would say, Judge, all I can tell you is his brother was worse.
So these were great characters.
He had another one where he said, in regards to mitigation of sentence, he paid his lawyer, and that's the first step towards rehabilitation.
Cy was great. Cy knew more law than people realized. Cy had a very kind and generous heart.
Little agenda.
Yeah, well, there's a memorial to him, and his black book is under glass in that memorial.
You and I talked about that before the show. You go into the public defender's office, and there's a wall dedicated to the, hundreds of former assistant public defenders that left the office. You go to the CIA building, they don't have names, but they got stars for every single person who's passed in the from the line of duty there. We don't have that. We've only got two or three people that we celebrate in the REG.
Right. Richard Sharpstein is rest in peace, and Cy Gare is up there.
Well, and isn't there a bust downstairs of Gerstein?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so there's three.
Yeah. There are judges who were just good, decent people who worked hard, and I don't know that they did anything special or outstanding, that they didn't preside over the Bundy case like Ed Cowart. Ed Cowart's recognized as one of the most brilliant judges ever to sit on a bench in this country. Apparently his just brains was off the chart brilliance. And of course he had an old country drawl Southern drawl called Miami. I appeared in front of him, and the first time that I was, and I objected, and he just looked, he said, well, bless your soul. And I looked at the clerk and I said, well, what does that mean? And she said, that's what he does.
Remember Calvin Mapp?
But other than that, and the Calvin Maps of the world, and there's another judge I'm thinking of, he was a county court judge. He was a paratrooper who jumped in the Korean War, Henry Oppenborn. And he started court every day with the Pledge of Allegiance. And he didn't do it because he was campaigning. He didn't do it because he was going to be on Instagram. He did it because he was a patriot. And he would say, I invite you to stand. And if you didn't stand, that was okay with him too. And he pledged allegiance to his country. There should be something, his name should be in that courthouse.
Al Millian does that.
Okay.
And I think
Al Million's an ex-paratrooper.
And I think it's a wonder. I really think it's, it takes me back because, I think about when we were in school, when we were kids, and we did the Pledge of Allegiance every day. It was patriotic. It was something you could count on. It was soothing. It was the way to start your day. It was a routine. It was a positive thing.
He was a genuine person. I'll give you another example. Stanley Goldstein, former Miami motorcycle cop, first judge for drug court. A warm-hearted, decent man who devoted the rest of the last part of his judicial career to helping others, not trying cases and sentencing people, but helping addicts. He was the first judge in drug court. And we, of course, were the first drug court in the nation. Stanley Goldstein. These people should have their names up there somewhere in the courthouse with a little blurb about them, as well as criminal defense lawyers and prosecutors. Abe Lazer's name should be there.
Or maybe a little star on the floor, like the Walk of Fame in Hollywood.
There you go.
Well,
they could do it from the security entrance to the Aubon Pond or Porto Cafe.
It would bother me if the judges' names were on the floor, because there's probably a few that I remember from the 80s that I'd spend my time stepping on, and it wouldn't be out of respect. So I think they should just be on the wall, because otherwise I'd find myself walking a path down the hallway so I could catch a couple of people I could step on because of what they did to me.
But I agree, Phil, they should have something for everybody, including prosecutors. And I say that.
Right. I said Abe Lazer's name should be up there. There were great prosecutors.
Before
Ed's time, as well as judges and public defenders and criminal defense attorneys, knowing full well that my name will never be on one of those plaques. So it's not that I have any self-interest whatsoever.
Just be a little something to remember who they were and what they did and the contributions that they made. Tom Peterson was a judge, but he was also a prosecutor who started the diversion program, pretrial intervention. There were just wonderful, wonderful people who really, and I do criticize judges, and I talk about the ones who gave me a problem, who I don't think were in it for the right reasons, but there really are dozens, probably approaching 100, who really were in it for the right reason and just wanted to do a good job and learn the law and read the law and be a part of our community and help our community. And they should be remembered. Manny Crespo.
He's another one.
One of a kind.
Off the top of it. And then the other judge who's in that courtroom, Rob Pinheiro.
I was just
Rob was a wonderful man. Died way too young.
Smart as well before Ed's time, there used to be a Cazzoli's in the courthouse.
That was that was what it was called when I walked in that building, Cazzoli's. Yeah.
Cazzoli's. It was a Cazzoli's pizzeria in the lobby. Right. And then it became the Pickle Barrel.
Right.
And all the way through those era of the 80s and the 90s and maybe even into the 2000s, that cafeteria on the first floor of the courthouse was like the pregame show, right? Everybody hung out there. Judges, lawyers, prosecutors, defense attorneys, cops, bailiffs, bail bondsmen.
There was a time over a period of 30 years where there's no doubt more cases were settled in that cafeteria than were ever settled in a courtroom.
Those judges, those old school judges used to take us into chambers. They paused calendar when they couldn't get, when we hit that point in calendar where they were like, okay, everything that's been resolved is going to be resolved. Now I want the lawyers in chambers. And some of those judges would basically lock you in the room and say, we're not leaving until we work out. 50% of these cases are going to be gone before those doors open, and they would really effort at facilitating a fair and reasonable closure, because they would push prosecutors who did not want to offer, and they would push defense attorneys or defendants who did not want to accept. And they'd find that common ground. They would force it, which they couldn't do on the record on the bench, but they could do at that time in chambers.
Well, back then, because it was different too. But
It's
you know,
true.
just going back to the Aubin Pond and the Cazolas, it's, you know, obviously I was much younger than you guys. So I didn't hear about those Cazolas things. You know, I'm a baby. But I used to get there at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:30. I used to get to the office at 7, do some work, and then I'd go over to that little cafeteria and I'd get there at the latest by 8 a.m. And that's where I got most of my legal training
Sure.
because I would sit at a table with the old guys
Yep.
that would talk, and judges. There'd be sometimes 2 judges sitting there. I don't know who they
Yeah.
were. Never met them in my life, but I'm having a cup of coffee with a couple of guys that have been around that are trying death penalty cases, that have been doing this for 20 or 30 years, and they're just talking war stories. Nothing was unethical. Nobody, you know, reported anybody to the JQC.
Nobody was trying to do anything unethical. No one was telling a judge, "Hey, I got a motion coming in front of you." I mean,
Right.
those things did happen, but not, you know, and those judges got in trouble for it in our bribery scandal. But in that court, in that cafeteria where there were hundreds of lawyers and dozens of judges, and everyone's drinking Cuban coffee and eating Cuban toast and just having a good time, you know, you'd be chatting with a judge about anything, and then you'd see someone come by and say, "Wait, come over here for a second. Sit down. All right, what can we do about this Smith case?" And then you had both parties and you talk to the judge about it.
You know, that's exactly how I got started. I
Right.
walked to get a cup of coffee. Let's say Phil's sitting at the table. I'm my own prosecutor in narcotics. I got a case with Phil. Phil's sitting with 7 people that have thousands of years of legal knowledge together. And he says, "Hey, Ed, come here. I want to talk to you about the case." He introduces me to the judge. He introduces me to Michael Haber. I sit down and have a cup of coffee. The next thing you know, I'm sitting at the table. And I spoke very little, which is rare for me, I know, but I spoke very little because I was learning. I was absorbing so much knowledge.
And Phil, we're running short on time, but I really want to address one thing I want you to talk about because I think a lot of people don't know. I mean, obviously everyone knows what the public defender's office is, but most people don't know, I don't think, about regional counsel, which
Sure.
is a relatively recent entity, and you're obviously intimately involved in it. So maybe you could just talk about
Yeah,
that.
very briefly. The simplest way to talk about it is in its largest aspect, but not complete. It's a backup public defender's office. So what happens is for the non-lawyers out there, or maybe the ones who don't practice criminal law, 3 defendants get arrested, and one of them has a private lawyer, and the public defender represents one. What are you going to do with the third person? Well, they used to appoint a lawyer for that, but there were abuses in the system. So instead, it became cheaper. Talk about how they were abusing the billing system. It became cheaper to create a whole separate state agency and hire lawyers and pay them a salary to represent that third person, the person that the public defender is conflicted out from. And now we only get court appointments if it after goes through regional counsel. So that's the majority of it. We do that in criminal court. We do it in juvenile court. We do it in dependency and delinquency court. But there's also a civil portion to that. So, and I'm not intimately familiar with it, but we have lawyers who appear in probate. If someone is being moved to be declared incompetent, we will get assigned to represent them. This is archaic now because of the Supreme Court's decision on abortion. But when abortion was legal in the state of Florida, and a child wanted to petition the court, they would appoint us to represent that child's interest, to represent elderly people's interest. The boss is here, if you remember, the person that I worked for when I was in private practice.
Gene Zanobi?
No,
you
Jackie, Judge Jackie just came
How
here. She's
dare
on
you.
a lunch break.
You want
Um,
this man in
but-
trouble? When he says the boss, there's only
Right.
one boss. Don't get that man in trouble.
Well, we
Right.
were talking about regional
He's not
counsel.
married, Phil. He doesn't get it. He's not
Zanobi,
I'm gonna
who's, talk about another character who's been around for a million years, right? Did we lose you, Phil?
No, I think he's trying to go off the headphones. No, we cannot hear you. You're gonna have
Yeah, we
to.
lost your audio, Phil. Take your time. So just to follow up on what Phil was saying, so regional counsel is that second tier.
okay.
Yeah, there we go. It's that second tier public defender's office. And I just wanted to bring it up so that people know it exists, but also for a period of time, you were full-time employed as regional counsel, and now you do that part-time.
I did a little both. I started part-time. I had a couple of very serious death penalty cases, so I went full-time, and then I transitioned back to part-time, and it's been great, and I've loved every minute of it. I can do the kind of work that I've been trained for without worrying about if a client can pay a fee. I can represent people in the most serious cases or the most interesting or difficult cases who need my help. I can devote my time to them, and it is truly an effort of love and joy, and celebrating my profession at its finest, because it's just strictly law.
The last thing I want to hit before we close is I want to just take a moment to, again, thanking you for being
It was
here.
great. I loved it.
The audience, that apart from being a top-notch attorney and just an all-around great guy, you're an interesting guy, and
Thanks.
you spend a lot of time in Ocean Reef. You're a fisherman, you're a chef, your pictures of I'm a foodie, so I love watching your food pics, and your kids, your sons, Michael and Charlie. And I want to congratulate Michael for getting into Rochester Institute of Technology.
Thank you.
And then also, finally, I want to plug your Instagram, which is crime_and_cats.
Yeah.
And myself, being an admitted cat dad,
Right.
I truly love the fact that you spend a lot of time fostering and sheltering and rescuing cats. So if you could just hit one last thing for me, and I think it dovetails into what I just said, because it really is this work-life balance and the importance of having those things that make you happy and that you can spend your time with that are not law-related.
Okay, so you guys need to have me back on the show. Give me 6 months. My latest book is being edited. I have an agent interested, and then I'm going to promote it. I'm also a fiction writer. And the name of the book is Grace Runs. It's not a legal thriller, but it is a thriller. I love to write. You've got to have a work-life balance. Otherwise, this profession will eat you up. So I love cats, and I somehow fell in love with some Instagram accounts where cats were needing to be fostered, and I began to do that. The problem with that is I couldn't give them back once I fostered them.
It's a vortex that sucks you
Yeah.
in.
So I have more cats than I'm willing to admit, but I still want to foster cats who need help. And so I thought it would be fun. I made this Instagram account, Crime and Cats. A couple of pictures of cats, a couple of pictures of me walking into court, a couple of things about my cats chasing each other, a couple of things about me fighting with prosecutors. I thought it'd be fun.
Sounds like my Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is pretty much mastered with the same thing.
Yeah, so there's got to be a work-life balance, because otherwise you burn out. You've seen it, Ed. You've seen it. We've all seen it. We've seen it with judges. We've seen it with prosecutors and defense attorneys. I mean, again, as a young lawyer after court, everyone repaired to bars, and there were guys sitting at bars who have been sitting there for 30 years drinking after court, and it became almost a warning sign to me. This profession, if you don't balance yourself out, will eat you alive, especially on our side of it.
And then there's the ones that didn't even bother to wait until court was over to start drinking.
Well, I won't say the name. You guys will figure it out. Brilliant judge, first in his class at University of Miami, supposedly the highest on the bar exam. I'm a young prosecutor. We shared a first name, so they figured it out from there. And he invites me into court, and then we go into chambers, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and he pulls out a Jack Daniels, and he goes, "You're going to join me, right?" I don't really drink very much, and I never drink at 8 a.m., but I felt compelled.
I'm moving my camera because I just want to show you something on my memory board, which you may or may not be able to discern here.
Yeah.
You see that?
My problem is I'm outside. So,
Mike, even the kids. You're talking about the bumper sticker or the piece?
Yeah, I've got a bumper sticker there that says "Justice demands that we keep Judge Knight."
There you go. So, yeah. And so we did a shot at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. We did a shot at 8 o'clock in the morning.
We got to wrap up because we're over the hour. But Phil, I would be thrilled if you would come back.
We would
be
love
happy to talk about your book as long as
I'll
we
let
get
you
to
know.
read it.
Yeah, of course.
In advance, we definitely want to be able to read it and talk about it.
I didn't know you're right. I want to read it. I don't know what would you say. I'm an aspiring writer.
Yes, you are definitely an aspiring.
Ed, I'll tell you the best piece of advice. Everyone's always said it to me. Every writer will tell it to you. It sounds silly, but it's true. Writers write. You want to be a writer? Write. Sit down at that screen. Get over the fear of an empty screen. Just start writing. Write gibberish. If something will come to you, take it from there. I'll come back and talk to you about the creative process. I'm so fascinated with muses and how an artist creates and how I apply that to my writing. Another show, another time.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thank you again so much for coming on today. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank
you. Really appreciate it, folks. We do not have a show next week. I'm in.
I'll come back. Just joking.
Yeah, I'm in trial next week, so we don't have a show.
Phil and I'll be here. We don't need.
Listen, you guys are welcome to do the show in my absence. Or you can come over to Milt Hirsch's courtroom and watch us do battle in a trafficking case.
Now, Michael, there's a show. Okay, but you need to book 4 hours. Just bring Milt on, say good morning, and then just sit back. And 4 hours later, he'll wrap up.
Are we going to wrap up with Othello or King Lear?
Well, that's the point. So,
all right, guys. Thank you so much. Our producers will upload the show to YouTube, and then we'll go ahead and upload it. Make sure you get a copy of that link as well, Phil. Thank you both very much. We all appreciate your attention and your patience and your watching episode 63 about your service with Haber and Martinez. And we will see you in 2 weeks on the 10th. I believe we have a guest booked. Yes, we do. We do have a guest booked on the 10th, but I'm going to tease it and not tell you who it is just yet. Take care, guys. Thank you both again very much.
Thanks again, Phil.
bye, guys. This was great.